Hello. Hello, hello, hello. It is wonderful to see you, and it is time to read books. So, today we have Five Chinese Brothers. And actually, I can pull this up just a little bit this time. The Five Chinese Brothers. Ta-da! There they are. There's five of them. Let's do it. Five Chinese Brothers. Five Chinese Brothers by Claire Huchett Bishop and Kurt Weiss. 2. My father who made me love China, and to my mother, a born storyteller. Wow, there's a lot of pages before we get to the story. Here we go. Once upon a time, there were 5 Chinese brothers, and they all looked exactly the same. I don't know about this book. They lived with their mother in a little house not far from the sea. The first Chinese brother could swallow the whole sea, and the second one had an iron neck. And iron is like made of metal. The third Chinese brother could stretch and stretch and stretch his legs forever. The fourth could not be burned, and the fifth could hold his breath as long as he wanted. Well, every morning, the first Chinese brother would go fishing, whatever the weather. And when he'd come back to the village, he would always have so many beautiful and rare fish, and he could always get a lot of money for them. One day, as he was leaving the marketplace, the little boy said, "Can I go with you?" "No, I'm afraid not," said the first Chinese brother. But the little boy begged, and finally the first Chinese brother said, "Fine, under one condition, that you need to obey whatever I say right away." "Yes, yes," said the little boy. Well, early the next morning, the first Chinese brother and the little boy went down to the beach. "Remember," said the first Chinese brother, "you must obey me right away. When I make a sign for you to come back, you must come at once." "Yes, yes," said the little boy. Wow, the first Chinese brother swallowed all of the water. He swallowed the sea. Wow. And all the fish were left just on the ground at the bottom of the sea, and all the treasures of the sea lay uncovered. And the little boy was delighted, and he ran here and ran there, stuffing his pockets with strange pebbles and extraordinary shells and fantastic algae. And near the shore, the first Chinese brother gathered together some fish while he kept holding the sea in his mouth. Now, pretty soon he grew tired, and it was very hard to hold the sea, so he made a sign with his hand for the little boy to come back. The little boy saw him, but ignored him. He did not pay attention, and he did not obey. And the first Chinese brother made great movements with his arms. The men, "Come back, come back." But did the little boy care? Not a bit. He saw, but he still ran further away. And then the first Chinese brother felt the sea was beginning to come out, and he made desperate gestures to call the little boy back. But the little boy just made faces at him and kept running farther away. Well, what do you think? The first Chinese brother held the sea as long as he could until he thought he was going to burst. And then it all came out. And that little boy sadly disappeared under the waves. Well, when the first Chinese brother returned to the village, he was arrested and put in prison and condemned to have his head chopped off because it was his fault that the little boy died, they said. Now, the morning that he was going to have his head chopped off, he said, "Can I go home and say goodbye to my mother?" The judge said, "I guess it's only fair." So the first Chinese brother went home, and the second Chinese brother came back in his place, and no one knew the difference. And all the people gathered together in this village square to watch the execution. The executioner took his sword and he struck a mighty blow to cut off the man's head. But the second Chinese brother got up and he smiled. He was the one who had an iron neck. So they simply could not cut off his head. And everybody was angry, and they decided that what they should do instead is they should drown him. So on the next day of the execution, the second Chinese brother said to the judge, "Can I go home and say goodbye to my mother?" And the judge said, "It is only fair." So the second Chinese brother went home, and the third Chinese brother came back in his place. And they put him on a boat and took him out to the open sea. And when they decided they were way far in the ocean, they threw him overboard. But look what he did. Shh. Whoa, it's hard to show you on the screen. Look how long his legs are. Wow. He began to stretch and stretch and stretch his legs way down so his feet were on the ground no matter how deep he went. He smiled and just bobbed up and down. He simply could not be drowned. Well, everybody was very angry, and they decided instead he should be burned. So in the morning of the execution, the third Chinese brother said, "Could I go home and say goodbye to my mother?" And the judge said, "It's only fair." So the third Chinese brother went home, and the fourth Chinese brother came back in his place. And he was tied up to a stake, and they put sticks all around him, and they lit them on fire. And as it burned, do you know what he said? He said, "Well, this is quite pleasant." "Bring some more wood," the people cried. And now the fire roared higher. And do you know what the fourth Chinese brother said? He said, "Oh, now it's very comfortable. It's very nice." Because he was the one that could not be burned. And everybody was getting more and more angry every minute, and they all decided instead he should be smothered, which means he can't breathe and he die. So on the morning of the execution, the fourth Chinese brother told the judge, "Could I please go home and say goodbye to my mother?" And the judge said, "It is only fair." So he went home to say goodbye to his mother, and he traded with the fifth Chinese brother. The fifth Chinese brother came back, and they got him, and they shoveled him into an oven that had been built and was full of whipped cream, so full there was no air in there. And they shut it tight, and everyone waited and waited. And they were not going to be tricked again. So they stayed there all night, and even a little bit after the morning, just to make sure. And then they opened the door, and he pulled him out. Ooh, and he shook his head, and he said, "Oh, that was a nice night's sleep." And everyone could not believe that he was still alive. But that was the fifth Chinese brother, and he could hold his breath forever. So the judge said, "We have tried to get rid of you in every possible way, and somehow it cannot be done. It must be that you are innocent, and it is not your fault that the little boy drowned." "Yes, yes," shouted all the people. So they let him go home, and they all went home. And the five Chinese brothers and their mother all lived together happily for many years. The end.